Gold, silver, royal jewels, sunken treasure. Images of a square rigger, tempest-tossed, all hands desperately fighting to keep her afloat. An angry sea and savage wind just as desperately fighting to drag her under to a final resting place. There is perhaps no more romantic notion, no more beckoning modern adventure than the exploration of the undersea world. And of that world, nothing more exotic than the search for sunken treasure. With host Rafael Lima, we'll explore a reef off the Bahamas in the Bermuda Triangle, where more ships went to the bottom than any other place in the world, in a quest for treasure. Our quest begins in Miami. Aboard one of Chalk's seaplanes, we make the 20-minute crossing across the Gulf Stream to the tiny island of Bimini.
On board the seaplane, we crossed the Gulf Stream. A northerly current the Spanish galleons followed on their way to the Bahamian Islands. I was eager for my arrival and the first day's dive.
The island of Bimini is 5 miles long and only 700 feet across at its widest point. Made famous in Ernest Hemingway's novel Islands in the Stream, it has been frequented since the 1600s by pirates, gun runners, and smugglers. It is in Bimini that we are met by some of the crew of the Treasure Quest and ferried to the salvage ship some 30 nautical miles away. The Treasure Quest was once a freshwater lake barge in Guatemala. Refitted for treasure salvage, she is now anchored off Nassau and serves as dive platform, hotel, and restaurant for her crew of divers.
What is this area?
This area is where the Santa Rosa lies. This is the area called the Gingerbreads, and this is the.
It is aboard the Treasure Quest that Raphael talked with dive master Jack McCutcheon about the area of jagged reefs called the Gingerbreads.
Is an area of shallow corals?
It's an area of shallow. They call it the Gingerbreads because it's rolling brown coral and looks like gingerbread. And that's why they call it the Gingerbread grounds. And it sticks out like a thumb. And there's only records of 2 wrecks in the Gingerbreads.
There's only records of 2 wrecks?
Of 2 wrecks, well.
How many wrecks have you found?
We found 21 in this one area.
These are all single wrecks here?
These are all single wrecks, and all these were visual search. We found nothing buried yet. And it's a graveyard. And the reason it's so interesting is because people were out here. If you were salvors and you ever got to Freeport or Nassau, where were you wrecked?
Yeah. Why so many wrecks on this particular area?
Well, they came up the old Bahama Channel, and you're out of sight of land from here. I mean, you're 35.2 miles from land, and you've got blue water right here, and all of a sudden you're in 4 to 6 foot coral heads.
The wreck that we're going to be working on is called?
Santa Rosa. She sunk in 1817. She was a Spanish merchantman. She had 350 passengers on board.
350 Spanish?
Well, yeah, Spanish, wealthy Spaniards carrying their own belongings back to Spain.
What do you expect to find on her?
There was 20 chests of silver. Some of it was salvaged, and the personal wealth of the Spaniards.
20 chests of silver?
Yeah.
How much is that worth?
About $40 million.
Jack, what's the second map?
This is the immediate area of the Santa Rosa.
This is what's called a scatter pattern?
The scattering pattern, right. Paperweights down here.
What does this show?
It shows where she came in. She came in from the blue. She dropped ballows here. She bounced across the rock. This hole is the coral heads. These are 4 to 6 foot, and this is like 27 to 30 foot of water. It comes right from the blue up to 5 to 6 feet, and they just tore apart. And this is about a half-mile area here.
When you say the blue, that means deep water.
The deep water, yeah.
Now, a storm must have blown her onto the...
A storm blew her on here like that.
Now, when you say she dropped her ballast, that means that her hull must have broken open.
She broke open, dropped her ballast, right. Her ballast scattered. This is almost half a mile. It's still scattered. There's a big ballast pile we haven't even put on the map here. And there's scattered ballast, like with the cannon here. And the rib, she's sitting in this large sand hole here, is the main hull of the ship.
So she dropped all her cannons?
Yeah, she dropped her cannons on the way, yeah.
So basically, apart from the Spanish, you're the
she's
only one
that salvaged her. And we haven't even begun yet.
Afterwards, the crew and Raphael prepare for the first day's dive on the Santa Rosa.
Before our first tank dive, we would first survey the area by snorkeling. There's always anticipation on a dive. When you're diving for treasure, your senses are working overtime. Adrenaline pumps. As you go over the side of the Zodiac, you're sure you're going to come up with gold, with silver, with treasure.
What the diver sees is not a recognizable sunken galleon. It is not an ancient wooden hull, masts and spars bearing the ripped sails of a ghost ship. What is visible is simply a coral bottom. A ship that sank in the 1600s has allowed the sea enough time for its coral to encrust its hull and hardware, to break down its fragile wooden structure and scatter it over the ocean floor. Although very little of the ship remains visible, there are occasional artifacts the tide or recent storms have uncovered. These are within reach, lying just under the sand in perhaps 30 to 40 feet of water. Here Raphael has found a fragment of a small crystal decanter. After another dive, he fans another piece of pottery out of the sand. What looks like a mound of coral rubble is, to the trained diver's eye, the sight that means treasure may be near. The rounded stones strewn on the bottom are from rivers and streams in Spain or Portugal where the galleons were built. They are ballast stones placed in the keel of the hull to keep it upright. They fell to the bottom as the wooden hull broke apart. These ballast piles are often encrusted with artifacts, perhaps gold and silver. Another coral-encrusted relic that could easily be overlooked is really the outline of one of the Santa Rosa's cannon, now lying half buried in sand. According to McCutcheon, from around the cannon, divers often find other heavier pieces, lead, jewelry, possibly gold. on this occasion, after repeated free dives, Raphael finds only porcelain fragments, tantalizing pieces of artifacts, but no gold or silver.
Hey. All right. Some bottles and stuff. As I lifted the fragile artifacts out of the dive bag, I was thrilled at the thought that probably I was the first person to handle these bottles since the sailors of the doomed ship. They were condiment bottles, probably from the galley area, since there were also bits and pieces of ceramic olive jars and pottery. Hey, got an inkwell.
Sure enough.
And, I don't know, a part of,
Looks like maybe
an urn?
The following day, the treasure quest would begin the arduous and dangerous task of lifting the cannon out of the water where it's been lying for nearly 400 years. According to stories from other diving expeditions, gold was often found under the tons of iron cannon.
Yeah, we can call on the VHF from Bimini and let them know whether we get on or not. Over.
Before the next day's dive, there is always the shipboard maintenance, supplies ordered from the mainland, fish to be cleaned, engines checked and repaired, radar checked for approaching storms.
While the ship's crew was hard at work, the ship's doctor and I had a chance to take a skiff to visit Bimini.
Hey, fellas, how you doing? Have a good trip.
Just 50 miles off the coast of Miami, Bimini is a tiny paradise. Years ago, it was the home of one of our most famous writers, Ernest Hemingway. Here, at the Complete Angler, Hemingway finished his novel, To Have and Have Not. Bonefish Willie, a local fisherman, was a young boy then who remembers some of Hemingway's adventures.
We had 3 good boxers in Bimini in those days, and he challenged those boxers, and he put down $200 on the table and said, now any one of you guys knock me out, you have $200. So he put the money on the table, $200, and said, now all right, let's go. Let's fight. And he get the first one and get in the ring, and he began to fight. And sometimes the first round and the second round, he make a TKO.
And he
knock him out.
On the way back from Bimini, we encountered one of the many electrical storms which come up so quickly in this area. Perhaps one of the reasons why the Bermuda Triangle has such a reputation for the disappearance of ships.
When these storms come up, these thunderstorms, how fast can the winds?
Well, you know, the thunderstorms at night can come up fast. They'll knock you down fast.
About how many ships do you think there are in this area? How many old Spanish galleons and British galleons, let's say of 1800 and before?
Gee, I don't know. It's, you know, many hundreds. Many hundreds?
Many hundreds?
Yeah, oh, many hundreds. They weren't all carrying gold and silver, unfortunately. There were many hundreds.
We arrived back at the ship just in time for the day's dive.
The crew of the Treasure Quest, like many working divers, carry their tanks in a very unorthodox way. They carry their tanks under their arms, making it easy to discard one for another while still underwater.
A cannon from a Spanish galleon can weigh from 2 to 3 tons. It is dead iron weight, seemingly rooted to the bottom. Bringing it to the surface is a difficult and dangerous job. The first matter of business is to dig by hand holes underneath the cannon for straps, which will eventually pull it free. The work is tiring and slow. Working with McCutcheon, Raphael gets a first-hand look at the difficulties of treasure diving.
As I began digging under the cannon, there was just sand. As I dug deeper, the sand turned to jagged coral rock, which cut my hands. The more sand and rock we fanned out, the more sand and rock would fall back into the hole. Sand and sediment floated in clouds around us, clogging our regulators, making an already difficult job of breathing even harder.
After considerable effort, the cannon is rigged and ready for the ship's winches and cranes. First, airbags must deliver it to the surface. Extreme caution must be used by the divers since the weight of the cannon, supported by straps and shackles, can at any moment swing free, knocking a diver unconscious, or can fall back to the ocean floor, trapping a diver on the bottom. The ship's crane begins winching the massive iron relic on board. Sledgehammers and chisels remove hundreds of years of coral and hardened sediment. With every hit from the sledgehammer, the cannon's coral coat reveals more of a gun in surprisingly good condition.
All right, watch your camera, Ken.
Cannonballs will if you get the fused one.
Yeah. Watch your head.
The cannon must be watered down constantly. Once in contact with the air, it begins to rust and deteriorate at an incredibly rapid rate. About an hour later, the almost pristine cannon is chipped away from its coral shroud. The muzzle of a gun that once broadsided pirates and marauding sailing ships now rests aboard the Treasure Quest, an exhumed relic of a time gone by. Finding the cannon meant we were in a promising portion of the reef. The next day, an underwater dredge would be used to sift the bottom in search of the treasure we all hoped lay waiting on the ocean floor. Removing debris off the bottom around the wreck is the first order of the new day. An underwater dredge is used. Sucking sediment, sand, and coral off the bottom, it leaves heavier items for the divers' metal detectors, leaving the outfall debris to float through the water like new snow. Under the dredge, the watchful eyes of the divers literally leave no stone unturned. The most ordinary-looking clumps of coral may hold a king's ransom.
After the dredge worked an area near the cannon, I had a chance again to join the dive team in sifting through the bottom. At one point, Doc turned up a small, heavy metal object. From the weight, look, and feel of it, we had found our first silver bar. What is that? What is this?
I thought it was silver at first. I thought it was silver. Right away, I saw the lead written on there. I think it was lead.
It's lead?
That's right.
But treasure diving is full of disappointment, and the disappointment of the lead bars was soon overlooked as the ship's cook called the crew in for lunch.
Got one more, Carter, when he gets through.
Over lunch, the conversation turns to the events of the day. Stories about the pile of coral someone thought might have looked like gold, a promising part of the reef, what the afternoon's dive might uncover.
After lunch, the crew prepares for the second dive of the day. This time, they will explore the remains of an English clipper ship, which sank in a hurricane with all hands aboard in the early 1800s, only 100 yards from where the Spanish galleon sank. On this dive, the underwater topography is much different. This time, it is more or less a recognizable ship, metal plates, encrusted winches, a ship's anchor, the assorted debris of a metal skeleton, belying what was once a grand clipper ship.
Working again with McCutcheon, we begin fanning an area near one of the metal girders of the ship. Appearing from just under the surface, we begin to find small fragments and artifacts. As we continue to dig, we uncover a small crystal prism, perhaps once used to allow sunlight below decks. Barely camouflaged by coral and debris, we uncover a portion of pottery. McCutcheon hands me a round wooden object. It occurs to me it's a doorknob, perhaps once used to open a lavish stateroom. And finally, what at first glance appears to be a human bone. Leaving the wreck below, I felt as if I was leaving a ghost ship, a Flying Dutchman forever entombed that would not unlock its secrets. Bringing the dive bag topside, we get a chance to study some of the artifacts. We have found, in the Clipper's galley, beer bottles, intact, after perhaps 200 years, some with the cork still in place and the beer still inside. Amidst the ship's crushed iron hulk, we found the top of a porcelain sugar bowl. A plate with a British royal seal still visible, probably used by the captain, since it was known the crew ate off pewter. And what was indeed part of a human rib, perhaps belonging to one of the Clipper's crew, perhaps to one of her ill-fated passengers who perished with the ship.
Although artifacts are valuable and museums pay large sums for genuine pieces, the gold and silver of both the ships continued to elude us. The treasure, according to authenticated records, still remains on the bottom of the Atlantic. The sea does not give up her secrets or her treasures easily. The treasure quest and her divers will remain on the reef, painstakingly sifting, digging, carefully salvaging piece by piece the wrecks of the gingerbreads. And it is perhaps only fitting that the sea guard its treasures so jealously. It might well be that the reef may never give up her gold and silver, just as she never gave up the ill-fated ships that sank and now rest in shallow graves on the bottom.